Chapter 5 of The People That Time Forgot. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Ralph Snelson. The People That Time Forgot by Edgar Rice Burroughs. Chapter 5. We were sitting before a little fire inside a safe grotto one night, shortly after we had quit the cliff dwellings of the Band lu, when So-al raised a question which it had never occurred to me to propound to Ajor. She asked her why she had left her own people and how she had come so far south as the country of the Alus, where I had found her. At first Ajor hesitated to explain, but at last she consented, and for the first time I heard the complete story of her origin and experiences. For my benefit she entered into greater detail of explanation than would have been necessary had I been a native Caspakian. "I am a cos-ata-lo," commenced Ajor, and then she turned toward me. "A cos-ata-lo, my Tom, is a woman, lo, who did not come from an egg, and thus on up from the beginning. Cors-va-sho. I was a babe at my mother's breast. Only among the Galus are such, and then but infrequently. The Wieroo get most of us, but my mother hid me until I had attained such size that the Wieroo could not readily distinguish me from one who had come up from the beginning. I knew both my mother and my father, as only such as I may. My father is high chief among the Galus. His name is Jor, and both he and my mother came up from the beginning, but one of them, probably my mother, had completed the 7 cycles, approximately 700 years, with the result that their offspring might be cos-ata-lo, or born as are all the children of your race, my Tom, as you tell me is the fact. I was therefore apart from my fellows in that my children would probably be as I, of a higher state of evolution, and so I was sought by the men of my people, but none of them appealed to me. I cared for none. The most persistent was Du-seen, a huge warrior of whom my father stood in considerable fear, since it was quite possible that Du-seen could wrest from him his chieftainship of the Galus. He has a large following of the newer Galus, those most recently come up from the Kolu, and as this class is usually much more powerful numerically than the older Galus, and as Du-seen's ambition knows no bounds, we have for a long time been expecting him to find some excuse for a break with Jor, the high chief, my father. A further complication lay in the fact that Du-seen wanted me, while I would have none of him, and then came evidence to my father's ears that he was in league with the Wieroo. A hunter returning late at night came trembling to my father, saying that he had seen Du-seen talking with a Wieroo in a lonely spot far from the village, and that plainly he had heard the words, "If you will help me, I will help you. I will deliver into your hands all cos-ata-lo among the Galus, now and hereafter, but for that service you must slay Jor, the high chief, and bring terror and confusion to his followers." Now when my father heard this, he was angry, but he was also afraid for me, who am cos-ata-lo. He called me to him and told me what he had heard, pointing out 2 ways in which we might frustrate Du-seen. The first was that I go to Du-seen as his mate, after which he would be loath to give me into the hands of the Wieroo, or to further abide by the wicked compact he had made, a compact which would doom his own offspring, who would doubtless be as am I, their mother. The alternative was flight until Du-seen should have been overcome and punished. I chose the latter and fled toward the south. Beyond the confines of the Galu country is little danger from the Wieroo, who seek ordinarily only Galus of the highest orders. There are 2 excellent reasons for this. One is that from the beginning of time jealousy had existed between the Wieroo and the Galus as to which would eventually dominate the world. It seems generally conceded that that race which first reaches a point of evolution which permits them to produce young of their own species and of both sexes must dominate all other creatures. The Wieroo first began to produce their own kind, after which evolution from Galu to Wieroo ceased gradually until now it is unknown. But the Wieroo produce only males, which is why they steal our female young, and by stealing cos ata lo they increase their own chances of eventually reproducing both sexes and at the same time lessen ours. Already the Galus produce both male and female, but so carefully do the Wieroo watch us that few of the males ever grow to manhood, while even fewer are the females that are not stolen away. It is indeed a strange condition, for while our greatest enemies hate and fear us, they dare not exterminate us, knowing that they too would become extinct but for us. Ah, but could we once get a start, I am sure that when all were true cos ata lo, there would have been evolved at last the true dominant race, before which all the world would be forced to bow. Ajor always spoke of the world as though nothing existed beyond Caspak. She could not seem to grasp the truth of my origin, or the fact that there were countless other peoples outside her stern barrier cliffs. She apparently felt that I came from an entirely different world. Where it was, and how I came to Caspak from it, were matters quite beyond her, with which she refused to trouble her pretty head. "Well," she continued, "and so I ran away to hide, intending to pass the cliffs to the south of Galu and find a retreat in the Kro-Lu country. It would be dangerous, but there seemed no other way. The third night I took refuge in a large cave in the cliffs at the edge of my own country. Upon the following day I would cross over into the Kro-Lu country, where I felt that I should be reasonably safe from the Wieroo, though menaced by countless other dangers. However, to a cos ata lo any fate is preferable to that of falling into the clutches of the frightful Wieroo, from whose land none returns. I had been sleeping peacefully for several hours when I was awakened by a slight noise within the cavern. The moon was shining brightly, illumining the entrance, against which I saw silhouetted the dread figure of a Wieroo. There was no escape. The cave was shallow, the entrance narrow. I lay very still, hoping against hope that the creature had but paused here to rest and might soon depart without discovering me. Yet all the while I knew that he came seeking me. I waited, scarce breathing, watching the thing creep stealthily toward me, its great eyes luminous in the darkness of the cave's interior, and at last I knew that those eyes were directed upon me, for the Wieroo can see in the darkness better than even the lion or the tiger. But a few feet separated us when I sprang to my feet and dashed madly toward my menacer in a vain effort to dodge past him and reach the outside world. It was madness, of course, for even had I succeeded temporarily, the Wieroo would have but followed and swooped down upon me from above. As it was, he reached forth and seized me, and though I struggled, he overpowered me. In the duel, his long white robe was nearly torn from him, and he became very angry, so that he trembled and beat his wings together in his rage. He asked me my name, but I would not answer him, and that angered him still more. At last he dragged me to the entrance of the cave, lifted me in his arms, spread his great wings, and leaping into the air, flapped dismally through the night. I saw the moonlit landscape sliding away beneath me, and then we were out above the sea and on our way to Oo-oh, the country of the Wieroo. The dim outlines of Oo-oh were unfolding below us when there came from above a loud whirring of giant wings. The Wieroo and I glanced up simultaneously to see a pair of huge jo-oos, flying reptiles, pterodactyls, swooping down upon us. The Wieroo wheeled and dropped almost to sea level, and then raced southward in an effort to outdistance our pursuers. The great creatures, notwithstanding their enormous weight, are swift on their wings, but the Wieroo are swifter. Even with my added weight, the creature that bore me maintained his lead, though he could not increase it. Faster than the fastest wind, we raced through the night, southward along the coast. Sometimes we rose to great heights, where the air was chill and the world below but a blur of dim outlines, but always the jo-oo stuck behind us. I knew that we had covered a great distance, for the rush of the wind by my face attested the speed of our progress, but I had no idea where we were when at last I realized that the Wieroo was weakening. One of the Jo-oos gained on us and succeeded in heading us, so that my captor had to turn in toward the coast. Further and further they forced him to the left. Lower and lower he sank. More labored was his breathing, and weaker the stroke of his once powerful wings. We were not 10 feet above the ground when they overtook us and at the edge of a forest. One of them seized the Wieroo by his right wing, and in an effort to free himself, he loosed his grasp upon me, dropping me to the earth. Like a frightened ecca, I leaped to my feet and raced for the sheltering sanctuary of the forest, where I knew neither could follow or seize me. Then I turned and looked back to see 2 great reptiles tear my abductor asunder and devour him on the spot. I was saved, yet I felt that I was lost. How far I was from the country of the Galus I could not guess, nor did it seem probable that I ever could make my way in safety to my native land. Day was breaking. Soon the carnivora would stalk forth for their first kill. I was armed only with my knife. About me was a strange landscape. The flowers, the trees, the grasses even, were different from those of my northern world, and presently there appeared before me a creature fully as hideous as the Wieroo, a hairy man-thing that barely walked erect. I shuddered, and then I fled. Through the hideous dangers that my forebears had endured in the early stages of their human evolution I fled, and always pursuing was the hairy monster that had discovered me. Later he was joined by others of his kind. They were the speechless men, the Alus, from whom you rescued me, my Tom. From then on you know the story of my adventures, and from the first I would endure them all again because they led me to you." It was very nice of her to say that, and I appreciated it. I felt that she was a mighty nice little girl whose friendship anyone might be glad to have. But I wished that when she touched me, those peculiar thrills would not run through me. It was most discomforting, because it reminded me of love, and I knew that I never could love this half-baked little barbarian. I was very much interested in her account of the Wieroo, which up to this time I had considered a purely mythological creature, but Ajor shuddered so at even the veriest mention of the name that I was loath to press the subject upon her, and so the Wieroo still remained a mystery to me. While the Wieroo interested me greatly, I had little time to think about them, as our waking hours were filled with the necessities of existence, the constant battle for survival which is the chief occupation of Caspakians. To-mar and So-al were now about fitted for their advent into Kro-lu society, and must therefore leave us, as we could not accompany them without incurring great danger ourselves and running the chance of endangering them. But each swore to be always our friend, and assured us that should we need their aid at any time, we had but to ask it. Nor could I doubt their sincerity, since we had been so instrumental in bringing them safely upon their journey toward the Kro-lu village. This was our last day together. In the afternoon we should separate, To-mar and So-al going directly to the Kro-lu village, while Ajor and I made a detour to avoid a conflict with the archers. The former both showed evidence of nervous apprehension as the time approached for them to make their entry into the village of their new people, and yet both were very proud and happy. They told us that they would be well received, as additions to a tribe always are welcomed, and the more so as the distance from the beginning increased, the higher tribes or races being far weaker numerically than the lower. The southern end of the island fairly swarms with the Ho-lu or apes. Next above these are the Alus, who are slightly fewer in number than the Ho-lu, and again there are fewer Bo-hu than Alus, and fewer Sto-lu than Bo-lu. Thus it goes until the Kro-lu are fewer in number than any of the others, and here the law reverses, for the Galus outnumber the Kro-lu. As Ajor explained it to me, the reason for this is that as evolution practically ceases with the Galus, there is no less among them on this score, for even the cos-ata-lo are still considered Galus and remain with them, and Galus come up both from the west and east coasts. There are, too, fewer carnivorous reptiles at the north end of the island, and not so many of the great and ferocious members of the cat family as take their hideous toll of life among the races further south. By now I was obtaining some idea of the Caspakian scheme of evolution, which partly accounted for the lack of young among the races I had so far seen. Coming up from the beginning, the Caspakian passes, during a single existence, through the various stages of evolution, or at least many of them, through which the human race has passed during the countless ages since life first stirred upon a new world. But the question which continued to puzzle me was, what creates life at the beginning, Korsvajo? I had noticed that as we traveled northward from the Alus country, the land had gradually risen until we were now several hundred feet above the level of the inland sea. Ajor told me that the Galus country was still higher and considerably colder, which accounted for the scarcity of reptiles. The change in form and kinds of the lower animals was even more marked than the evolutionary stages of man. The diminutive eka, or small horse, became a rough-coated and sturdy little pony in the Kolu country. I saw a greater number of small lions and tigers, though many of the huge ones still persisted, while the woolly mammoth was more in evidence, as were several varieties of the labyrinthodonta. These creatures, from which, God save me, I should have expected to find further south, but for some unaccountable reason they gain their greatest bulk in the Kro-Lu and Galu countries, though fortunately they are rare. I rather imagine that they are a very early life which is rapidly nearing extinction in Caspak, though wherever they are found, they constitute a menace to all forms of life. It was mid-afternoon when To-mar and So-al bade us good bye. We were not far from Kro-Lu village. In fact, we had approached it much closer than we had intended, and now Ajor and I were to make a detour toward the sea, while our companions went directly in search of the Kro-Lu chief. Ajor and I had gone perhaps a mile or two and were just about to emerge from a dense wood when I saw that ahead of us which caused me to draw back into concealment, at the same time pushing Ajor behind me. What I saw was a party of Band lu warriors, large, fierce-appearing men. From the direction of their march, I saw that they were returning to their caves, and that if we remained where we were, they would pass without discovering us. Presently Ajor nudged me. "They have a prisoner," she whispered. "He is Kro-Lu." And then I saw him, the first fully developed Kro-Lu I had seen. He was a fine-looking savage, tall and straight, with a regal carriage. To-mar was a handsome fellow, but this Kro-Lu showed plainly in his every physical attribute a higher plane of evolution. While To-mar was just entering the Kro-Lu sphere, this man, it seemed to me, must be close indeed to the next stage of his development, which would see him an envied Galu. "They will kill him?" I whispered to Ajor. "The dance of death," she replied, and I shuddered, so recently had I escaped the same fate. It seemed cruel that one who must have passed safely up through all the frightful stages of human evolution within Caspak should die at the very foot of his goal. I raised my rifle to my shoulder and took careful aim at one of the Band lu. If I hit him, I would hit two, for another was directly behind the first. Ajor touched my arm. "What would you do?" she asked. "They are all our enemies." "I am going to save them from the dance of death," I replied, "enemy or no enemy," and I squeezed the trigger. At the report, the two Band lu lunged forward upon their faces. I handed my rifle to Ajor and drawing my pistol, stepped out in full view of the startled party. The Band lu did not run away as had some of the lower orders of Caspakians at the sound of the rifle. Instead, the moment they saw me, they let out a series of demoniac war cries, and raising their spears above their heads, charged me. The Kro-Lu stood silent and statuesque, watching the proceedings. He made no attempt to escape, though his feet were not bound and none of the warriors remained to guard him. There were 10 of the Band lu coming for me. I dropped 3 of them with my pistol as rapidly as a man might count 3, and then my rifle spoke close to my left shoulder, and another of them stumbled and rolled over and over upon the ground. Plucky little Ajor! She had never fired a shot before in all her life, though I had taught her to sight and aim, and how to squeeze the trigger instead of pulling it. She had practiced these new accomplishments often, but little had I thought they would make a marksman of her so quickly. With 6 of their fellows put out of the fight so easily, the remaining 6 sought cover behind some low bushes and commenced a council of war. I wished that they would go away, as I had no ammunition to waste, and I was fearful that should they institute another charge, some of them would reach us, for they were already quite close. Suddenly one of them rose and launched his spear. It was the most marvelous exhibition of speed I have ever witnessed. It seemed to me that he had scarce gained an upright position when the weapon was halfway upon its journey, speeding like an arrow toward Ajor. And then it was, with that little life in danger, that I made the best shot I have ever made in my life. I took no conscious aim. It was as though my subconscious mind, impelled by a stronger power even than that of self-preservation, directed my hand. Ajor was in danger. Simultaneously with the thought, my pistol flew to position. A streak of incandescent powder marked the path of the bullet from its muzzle, and the spear, its point shattered, was deflected from its path. With a howl of dismay, the 6 Band lu rose from their shelter and raced away toward the south. I turned toward Ajor. She was very white and wide-eyed, for the clutching fingers of death had all but seized her. But a little smile came to her lips and an expression of great pride to her eyes. "My Tom," she said, and took my hand in hers. That was all. "My Tom," and a pressure of the hand. Her Tom? Something stirred within my bosom. Was it exultation or was it consternation? Impossible! I turned away almost brusquely. "Come," I said, and strode off toward the Kro lu prisoner. The Kro lu stood watching us with stolid indifference. I presume that he expected to be killed, but if he did, he showed no outward sign of fear. His eyes, indicating his greatest interest, were fixed upon my pistol or the rifle which Ajor still carried. I cut his bonds with my knife. As I did so, an expression of surprise tinged and animated the haughty reserve of his countenance. He eyed me quizzically. "What are you going to do with me?" he asked. "You are free," I replied. "Go home if you wish." "Why don't you kill me?" he inquired. "I am defenseless." "Why should I kill you? I have risked my life and that of this young lady to save your life. Why, therefore, should I now take it?" Of course I didn't say "young lady," as there is no Caspakian equivalent for that term, but I have to allow myself considerable latitude in the translation of Caspakian conversations. To speak always of a beautiful young girl as a "she" may be literal, but it seems far from gallant. The Kro lu concentrated his steady, level gaze upon me for at least a full minute. Then he spoke again. "Who are you, man of strange skins?" he asked. "Your she is Galu, but you are neither Galu nor Kro lu nor Band lu nor any other sort of man which I have seen before. Tell me from whence comes so mighty a warrior and so generous a foe." "It is a long story," I replied, "but suffice it to say that I am not of Caspak. I am a stranger here, and, let this sink in, I am not a foe. I have no wish to be an enemy of any man in Caspak, with the possible exception of the Galu warrior Du-seen." "Du-seen!" he exclaimed. "You are an enemy of Du-seen? And why?" "Because he would harm Ajor," I replied. "You know him?" "He cannot know him," said Ajor. "Du-seen rose from the Kro lu long ago, taking a new name, as all do when they enter a new sphere. He cannot know him, as there is no intercourse between the Kro lu and the Galu." The warrior smiled. "Du-seen rose not so long ago," he said, "that I do not recall him well, and recently he has taken it upon himself to abrogate the ancient laws of Caspak. He had had intercourse with the Kro lu. Du-seen would be chief of the Galus, and he has come to the Kro lu for help." Ajor was aghast. The thing was incredible. Never had Kro lu and Galu had friendly relations. By the savage laws of Caspak they were deadly enemies, for only so can the several races maintain their individuality. "Will the Kro lu join him?" asked Ajor. "Will they invade the country of Jor, my father?" "The younger Kro-Lu favor the plan," replied the warrior, "since they believe they will thus become Galus immediately. They hope to span the long years of change through which they must pass in the ordinary course of events and at a single stride become Galus. We of the older Kro-Lu tell them that though they occupy the land of the Galu and wear the skins and ornaments of the golden people, still they will not be Galus till the time arrives that they are ripe to rise. We also tell them that even then they will never become a true Galu race, since there will still be those among them who can never rise. It is all right to raid the Galu country occasionally for plunder, as our people do, but to attempt to conquer it and hold it is madness. For my part, I have been content to wait until the call came to me. I feel that it cannot now be long." "What is your name?" asked Ajor. "Chal-az," replied the man. "You are chief of the Kro-Lu?" Ajor continued. "No, it is Altan who is chief of the Kro-Lu of the east," answered Chal-az. "And he is against this plan to invade my father's country?" "Unfortunately, he is rather in favor of it," replied the man, "since he has about come to the conclusion that he is Batu. He has been chief ever since before I came up from the Band lu, and I can see no change in him in all those years. In fact, he still appears to be more Band lu than Kro-Lu. However, he is a good chief and a mighty warrior, and if Du-seen persuades him to his cause, the Galus may find themselves under a Kro-Lu chieftain before long, Du-seen as well as the others, for Altan would never consent to occupy a subordinate position, and once he plants a victorious foot in Galu, he will not withdraw it without a struggle." I asked them what Batu meant, as I had not before heard the word. Literally translated, it is equivalent to through, finished, done for, as applied to an individual's evolutionary progress in Caspak. And with this information was developed the interesting fact that not every individual is capable of rising through every stage to that of Galu. Some never progress beyond the Alu stage; others stop at Bo-lu, as Sto-lu, as Band-lu, or as Kro-lu. The Ho-lu of the first generation may rise to become Alus; the Alus of the second generation may become Bo-lu, while it requires 3 generations of Bo-lu to become Band-lu, and so on until Kro-lu's parent on one side must be of the 6th generation. It was not entirely plain to me even with this explanation, since I couldn't understand how there could be different generations of peoples who apparently had no offspring. Yet I was commencing to get a slight glimmer of the strange laws which govern propagation and evolution in this weird land. Already I knew that the warm pools which always lie close to every tribal abiding place were closely linked with the Caspakian scheme of evolution, and that the daily immersion of the females in the greenish slimy water was in response to some natural law, since neither pleasure nor cleanliness could be derived from what seemed almost a religious rite. Yet I was still at sea, nor seemingly could Ajor enlighten me, since she was compelled to use words which I could not understand and which it was impossible for her to explain the meanings of. As we stood talking, we were suddenly startled by a commotion in the bushes and among the boles of the trees surrounding us, and simultaneously 100 Kro-Lu warriors appeared in a rough circle about us. They greeted Chal-az with a volley of questions as they approached slowly from all sides, their heavy bows fitted with long, sharp arrows. Upon Ajor and me they looked with covetousness in the one instance and suspicion in the other, but after they had heard Chal-az's story, their attitude was more friendly. A huge savage did all the talking. He was a mountain of a man, yet perfectly proportioned. "This is Altan the chief," said Chal-az by way of introduction. Then he told something of my story, and Altan asked me many questions of the land from which I came. The warriors crowded around close to hear my replies, and there were many expressions of incredulity as I spoke of what was to them another world, of the yacht which had brought me over vast waters, and of the plane that had borne me Jo-oo like over the summit of the barrier cliffs. It was the mention of the hydroaeroplane which precipitated the first outspoken skepticism, and then Ajor came to my defense. "I saw it with my own eyes," she exclaimed. I saw him flying through the air in battle with a Jo oo. The Alus were chasing me, and they saw and ran away." "Who is this she?" demanded Al tan suddenly, his eyes fixed fiercely upon Ajor. For a moment there was silence. Ajor looked up at me, a hurt and questioning expression on her face. "Whose she is this?" repeated Al tan. "She is mine," I replied, though what force it was that impelled me to say it I could not have told. But an instant later I was glad that I had spoken the words, for the reward of Ajor's proud and happy face was reward indeed. Al tan eyed her for several minutes, and then turned to me. "Can you keep her?" he asked, just a tinge of a sneer upon his face. I laid my palm upon the grip of my pistol and answered that I could. He saw the move, glanced at the butt of the automatic where it protruded from its holster, and smiled. Then he turned, and raising his great bow, fitted an arrow and drew the shaft far back. His warriors, supercilious smiles upon their faces, stood silently watching him. His bow was the longest and the heaviest among them all. A mighty man indeed must he be to bend it. Yet Al tan drew the shaft back until the stone point touched his left forefinger, and he did it with consummate ease. Then he raised the shaft to the level of his right eye, held it there for an instant, and released it. When the arrow stopped, half its length protruded from the opposite side of a 6-inch tree 50 feet away. Al tan and his warriors turned toward me with expressions of immense satisfaction upon their faces, and then, apparently for Ajor's benefit, the chieftain swaggered to and fro a couple of times, swinging his great arms and his bulky shoulders, for all the world like a drunken prize fighter at a beach dance hall. I saw that some reply was necessary, and so in a single motion I drew my gun, dropped it on the still quivering arrow, and pulled the trigger. At the sound of the report, the Kro lu leaped back and raised their weapons, but as I was smiling, they took heart and lowered them again. Following my eyes to the tree, the shaft of their chief was gone, and through the bole was a little round hole marking the path of my bullet. It was a good shot, if I do say it myself, as shouldn't, but necessity must have guided that bullet. I simply had to make a good shot, that I might immediately establish my position among those savage and warlike Caspakians of the sixth sphere. That it had its effect was immediately noticeable, but I am none too sure that it helped my cause with Al tan. Whereas he might have condescended to tolerate me as a harmless and interesting curiosity, he now, by the change in his expression, appeared to consider me in a new and unfavorable light. Nor can I wonder, knowing this type as I did, for had I not made him ridiculous in the eyes of his warriors, beating him at his own game? What king, savage or civilized, could condone such impudence? Seeing his black scowls, I deemed it expedient, especially on Ajor's account, to terminate the interview and continue upon our way. But when I would have done so, Al tan detained us with a gesture, and his warriors pressed around us. "What is the meaning of this?" I demanded, and before Al tan could reply, Chal az raised his voice in our behalf. "Is this the gratitude of a Kro lu chieftain, Al tan?" he asked, "to one who has served you by saving one of your warriors from the enemy, saving him from the death dance of the Band lu?" Al tan was silent for a moment, and then his brow cleared, and the faint imitation of a pleasant expression struggled for existence as he said: "The stranger will not be harmed. I wished only to detain him that he may be feasted tonight in the village of Altan the Kro lu. In the morning he may go his way. Altan will not hinder him." I was not entirely reassured, but I wanted to see the interior of the Kro lu village, and anyway I knew that if Altan intended treachery, I would be no more in his power in the morning than I now was. In fact, during the night I might find opportunity to escape with Ajor, while at the instant neither of us could hope to escape unscathed from the encircling warriors. Therefore, in order to disarm him of any thought that I might entertain suspicion as to his sincerity, I promptly and courteously accepted his invitation. His satisfaction was evident, and as we set off toward his village, he walked beside me, asking many questions as to the country from which I came, its peoples and their customs. He seemed much mystified by the fact that we could walk abroad by day or night, without fear of being devoured by wild beasts or savage reptiles, and when I told him of the great armies which we maintained, his simple mind could not grasp the fact that they existed solely for the slaughtering of human beings. "I am glad," he said, "that I do not dwell in your country among such savage peoples. Here in Caspak men fight with men when they meet, men of different races, but their weapons are first for the slaying of beasts in the chase and in defense. We do not fashion weapons solely for the killing of man as do your peoples. Your country must indeed be a savage country, from which you are fortunate to have escaped to the peace and security of Caspak." Here was a new and refreshing viewpoint, nor could I take exception to it after what I had told Altan of the great war which had been raging in Europe for over 2 years before I left home. On the march to the Kro-Lu village we were continually stalked by innumerable beasts of prey, and 3 times we were attacked by frightful creatures; but Altan took it all as a matter of course, rushing forward with raised spear or sending a heavy shaft into the body of the attacker, and then returning to our conversation as though no interruption had occurred. Twice were members of his band mauled, and one was killed by a huge and bellicose rhinoceros; but the instant the action was over, it was as though it never had occurred. The dead man was stripped of his belongings and left where he had died. The carnivora would take care of his burial. The trophies that these Kro-Lu left to the meat eaters would have turned an English big game hunter green with envy. They did, it is true, cut all the edible parts from the rhino and carry them home, but already they were pretty well weighted down with the spoils of the chase, and only the fact that they are particularly fond of rhino meat caused them to do so. They left the hide on the pieces they selected, as they use it for sandals, shield covers, the hilts of their knives, and various other purposes where tough hide is desirable. I was much interested in their shields, especially after I saw one used in defense against the attack of a saber-toothed tiger. The huge creature had charged us without warning from a clump of dense bushes where it was lying up after eating. It was met with an avalanche of spears, some of which passed entirely through its body, with such force were they hurled. The charge was from a very short distance, requiring the use of the spear rather than the bow and arrow; but after the launching of the spears, the men not directly in the path of the charge sent bolt after bolt into the great carcass with almost incredible rapidity. The beast, screaming with pain and rage, bore down upon Chal-az, while I stood helpless with my rifle for fear of hitting one of the warriors who were closing in upon it. But Chal-az was ready. Throwing aside his bow, he crouched behind his large oval shield, in the center of which was a hole about 6 inches in diameter. The shield was held by tight loops to his left arm, while in his right hand he grasped his heavy knife. Bristling with spears and arrows, the great cat hurled itself upon the shield, and down went Chal-az upon his back with the shield entirely covering him. The tiger clawed and bit at the heavy rhinoceros hide with which the shield was faced, while Chal-az, through the round hole in the shield's center, plunged his blade repeatedly into the vitals of the savage animal. Doubtless the battle would have gone to Chal-az even though I had not interfered; but the moment that I saw a clean opening, with no Kro-Lu beyond, I raised my rifle and killed the beast. When Chal-az arose, he glanced at the sky and remarked that it looked like rain. The others already had resumed the march toward the village. The incident was closed. For some unaccountable reason, the whole thing reminded me of a friend who once shot a cat in his backyard. For 3 weeks he talked of nothing else. It was almost dark when we reached the village, a large palisaded enclosure of several hundred leaf-thatched huts set in groups of from 2 to 7. The huts were hexagonal in form, and where grouped were joined so that they resembled the cells of a beehive. One hut meant a warrior and his mate, and each additional hut in a group indicated an additional female. The palisade which surrounded the village was of logs set close together and woven into a solid wall with tough creepers which were planted at their base and trained to weave in and out to bind the logs together. The logs slanted outward at an angle of about 30 degrees, in which position they were held by shorter logs embedded in the ground at right angles to them, and with their upper ends supporting the longer pieces a trifle above their centers of equilibrium. Along the top of the palisade sharpened stakes had been driven at all sorts of angles. The only opening into the enclosure was through a small aperture 3 feet wide and 3 feet high, which was closed from the inside by logs about 6 feet long, laid horizontally one upon another, between the inside face of the palisade and two other braced logs which paralleled the face of the wall upon the inside. As we entered the village, we were greeted by a not unfriendly crowd of curious warriors and women, to whom Chal-az generously explained the service we had rendered him, whereupon they showered us with the most well-meant attentions, for Chal-az, it seemed, was a most popular member of the tribe. Necklaces of lion and tiger teeth, bits of dried meat, finely tanned hides, and earthen pots, beautifully decorated, they thrust upon us until we were loaded down, and all the while Altan glared balefully upon us, seemingly jealous of the attentions heaped upon us because we had served Chal-az. At last we reached a hut that they set apart for us, and there we cooked our meat and some vegetables the women brought us, and had milk from cows, the first I had had in Caspak, and cheese from the milk of wild goats, with honey and thin bread made from wheat flour of their own grinding, and grapes and the fermented juice of grapes. It was quite the most wonderful meal I had eaten since I quit the Toreador and Bowen J. Tyler's colored chef, who could make pork chops taste like chicken and chicken taste like heaven. End of chapter 5. Chapter 6 of The People That Time Forgot. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Ralph Snelson. The People That Time Forgot by Edgar Rice Burroughs. Chapter 6. After dinner I rolled a cigarette and stretched myself at ease upon a pile of furs before the doorway, with Ajor's head pillowed in my lap, and a feeling of great content pervading me. It was the first time since my plane had topped the barrier cliffs of Caspak that I had felt any sense of peace or security. My hand wandered to the velvet cheek of the girl I had claimed as mine, and to her luxuriant hair and the golden fillet which bound it close to her shapely head. Her slender fingers groping upward sought mine and drew them to her lips, and then I gathered her in my arms and crushed her to me, smothering her mouth with a long, long kiss. It was the first time that passion had tinged my intercourse with Ajor. We were alone, and the hut was ours until morning. But now from beyond the palisade, in the direction of the main gate, came the hallooing of men and the answering calls and queries of the guard. We listened. Returning hunters, no doubt. We heard them enter the village amidst the barking dogs. I have forgotten to mention the dogs of Kolu. The village swarmed with them, gaunt, wolf-like creatures that guarded the herd by day when it grazed without the palisade. 10 dogs to a cow. By night the cows were herded in an outer enclosure roofed against the onslaughts of the carnivorous cats, and the dogs, with the exception of a few, were brought into the village. These few well-tested brutes remained with the herd. During the day they fed plentifully upon the beasts of prey which they killed in protection of the herd, so that their keep amounted to nothing at all. Shortly after the commotion at the gate had subsided, Ajor and I arose to enter the hut, and at the same time a warrior appeared from one of the twisted alleys which, lying between the irregularly placed huts and groups of huts, form the streets of the Kro-Lu village. The fellow halted before us and addressed me, saying that Altan desired my presence at his hut. The wording of the invitation and the manner of the messenger threw me entirely off my guard, so cordial was the one and respectful the other, and the result was that I went willingly, telling Ajor that I would return presently. I had laid my arms and ammunition aside as soon as we had taken over the hut, and I left them with Ajor now, as I had noticed that aside from their hunting knives, the men of Kolu bore no weapons about the village streets. There was an atmosphere of peace and security within that village that I had not hoped to experience within Caspak, and after what I had passed through, it must have cast a numbing spell over my faculties of judgment and reason. I had eaten of the lotus flower of safety. Dangers no longer threatened, for they had ceased to be. The messenger led me through the labyrinthine alleys to an open plaza near the center of the village. At one end of this plaza was a long hut, much the largest that I had yet seen, before the door of which were many warriors. I could see that the interior was lighted and that a great number of men were gathered within. The dogs about the plaza were as thick as fleas, and those I approached closely evinced a strong desire to devour me, their noses evidently apprising them of the fact that I was of an alien race, since they paid no attention whatever to my companion. Once inside the council hut, for such it appeared to be, I found a large concourse of warriors seated, or rather squatted, around the floor. At one end of the oval space which the warriors left down the center of the room stood Altan and another warrior whom I immediately recognized as a Galu, and then I saw that there were many Galus present. About the walls were a number of flaming torches stuck in holes in a clay plaster, which evidently served the purpose of preventing the inflammable wood and grasses of which the hut was composed from being ignited by the flames. Lying about among the warriors, or wandering restlessly to and fro, were a number of savage dogs. The warriors eyed me curiously as I entered, especially the Galus, and then I was conducted into the center of the group and led forward toward Altan. As I advanced, I felt one of the dogs sniffing at my heels, and of a sudden a great brute leaped upon my back. As I turned to thrust it aside before its fangs found a hold upon me, I beheld a huge Airedale leaping frantically about me. The grinning jaws, the half-closed eyes, the back-laid ears spoke to me louder than might the words of man that here was no savage enemy, but a joyous friend. And then I recognized him, and fell to one knee and put my arms about his neck, while he whined and cried with joy. It was Nobs, dear old Nobs, Bowen Tyler's Nobs, who had loved me next to his master. "Where is the master of this dog?" I asked, turning toward Altan. The chieftain inclined his head toward the Galu standing at his side. "He belongs to Du-seen the Galu," he replied. "He belongs to Bowen J. Tyler, Jr., of Santa Monica," I retorted, "and I want to know where his master is." The Galu shrugged. "The dog is mine," he said. "He came to me cor-sva-jo, and he is unlike any dog in Caspak, being kind and docile and yet a killer when aroused. I would not part with him. I do not know the man of whom you speak." So this was Du-seen. This was the man from whom Ajor had fled. I wondered if he knew that she was here. I wondered if they had sent for me because of her. But after they had commenced to question me, my mind was relieved. They did not mention Ajor. Their interest seemed centered upon the strange world from which I had come, my journey to Caspak, and my intentions now that I had arrived. I answered them frankly, as I had nothing to conceal, and assured them that my only wish was to find my friends and return to my own country. In the Galu Du-seen and his warriors I saw something of the explanation of the term golden race which is applied to them, for their ornaments and weapons were either wholly of beaten gold or heavily decorated with the precious metal. They were a very imposing set of men, tall and straight and handsome. About their heads were bands of gold, like that which Ajor wore, and from their left shoulders depended the leopard tails of the Galus. In addition to the deerskin tunic which constituted the major portion of their apparel, each carried a light blanket of barbaric yet beautiful design, the first evidence of weaving I had seen in Caspak. Ajor had had no blanket, having lost it during her flight from the attentions of Du-seen, nor was she so heavily encrusted with gold as these male members of her tribe. The audience must have lasted fully an hour when Altan signified that I might return to my hut. All the time Nobs had lain quietly at my feet, but the instant that I turned to leave, he was up and after me. Du-seen called to him, but the terrier never even so much as looked in his direction. I had almost reached the doorway leading from the council hall when Altan rose and called after me. "Stop!" he shouted. "Stop, stranger! The beast of Du-seen, the Galu, follows you." "The dog is not Du-seen's," I replied. "He belongs to my friend, as I told you, and he prefers to stay with me until his master is found." And I turned again to resume my way. I had taken but a few steps when I heard a commotion behind me, and at the same moment a man leaned close and whispered "Kazar" close to my ear. Kazar, the Caspakian equivalent of beware. It was To-mar. As he spoke, he turned quickly away as though loath to have others see that he knew me, and at the same instant I wheeled to discover Du-seen striding rapidly after me. Altan followed him, and it was evident that both were angry. Du-seen, a weapon half drawn, approached truculently. "The beast is mine," he reiterated. "Would you steal him?" "He is not yours nor mine," I replied, "and I am not stealing him. If he wishes to follow you, he may. I will not interfere; but if he wishes to follow me, he shall, nor shall you prevent." I turned to Altan. "Is not that fair?" I demanded. "Let the dog choose his master." Du-seen, without waiting for Altan's reply, reached for Nobs and grasped him by the scruff of the neck. I did not interfere, for I guessed what would happen, and it did. With a savage growl, Nobs turned like lightning upon the Galu, wrenched loose from his hold and leaped for his throat. The man stepped back and warded off the first attack with a heavy blow of his fist, immediately drawing his knife with which to meet the Airedale's return. And Nobs would have returned all right had not I spoken to him. In a low voice I called to him to heel. For just an instant he hesitated, standing there trembling and with bared fangs glaring at his foe. But he was well trained and had been out with me quite as much as he had been with Bowen. In fact, I had had most to do with his early training. Then he walked slowly and very stiff-legged to his place behind me. Du-seen, red with rage, would have had it out with the two of us had not Altan drawn him to one side and whispered in his ear, upon which, with a grunt, the Galu walked straight back to the opposite end of the hall, while Nobs and I continued upon our way toward the hut and Ajor. As we passed out into the village plaza, I saw Chal-az. We were so close to one another that I could have reached out and touched him, and our eyes met; but though I greeted him pleasantly and paused to speak to him, he brushed past me without a sign of recognition. I was puzzled at his behavior, and then I recalled that To-mar, though he had warned me, had appeared not to wish to seem friendly with me. I could not understand their attitude, and was trying to puzzle out some sort of explanation, when the matter was suddenly driven from my mind by the report of a firearm. Instantly I broke into a run, my brain in a whirl of forebodings, for the only firearms in the Kro-lu country were those I had left in the hut with Ajor. That she was in danger I could not but fear, as she was now something of an adept in the handling of both the pistol and rifle, a fact which largely eliminated the chance that the shot had come from an accidentally discharged firearm. When I left the hut, I had felt that she and I were safe among friends. No thought of danger was in my mind; but since my audience with Altan, the presence and bearing of Du-seen and the strange attitude of both To-mar and Chal-az had each contributed toward arousing my suspicions, and now I ran along the narrow, winding alleys of the Kro-lu village with my heart fairly in my mouth. I am endowed with an excellent sense of direction, which has been greatly perfected by the years I have spent in the mountains and upon the plains and deserts of my native state, so that it was with little or no difficulty that I found my way back to the hut in which I had left Ajor. As I entered the doorway, I called her name aloud. There was no response. I drew a box of matches from my pocket and struck a light, and as the flame flared up, a half dozen brawny warriors leaped upon me from as many directions. But even in the brief instant that the flare lasted, I saw that Ajor was not within the hut, and that my arms and ammunition had been removed. As the six men leaped upon me, an angry growl burst from behind them. I had forgotten Nobs. Like a demon of hate he sprang among those Kro-lu fighting men, tearing, rending, ripping with his long tusks and his mighty jaws. They had me down in an instant, and it goes without saying that the six of them could have kept me there had it not been for Nobs. But while I was struggling to throw them off, Nobs was springing first upon one and then upon another of them, until they were so put to it to preserve their hides and their lives from him that they could give me only a small part of their attention. One of them was assiduously attempting to strike me on the head with his stone hatchet, but I caught his arm and at the same time turned over upon my belly, after which it took but an instant to get my feet under me and rise suddenly. As I did so, I kept a grip upon the man's arm, carrying it over one shoulder. Then I leaned suddenly forward and hurled my antagonist over my head to a hasty fall at the opposite side of the hut. In the dim light of the interior I saw that Nobs had already accounted for one of the others, one who lay very quiet upon the floor, while the four remaining upon their feet were striking at him with knives and hatchets. Running to one side of the man I had just put out of the fighting, I seized his hatchet and knife, and in another moment was in the thick of the argument. I was no match for these savage warriors with their own weapons, and would soon have gone down to ignominious defeat and death had it not been for Nobs, who alone was a match for the four of them. I never saw any creature so quick upon its feet as was that great Airedale, nor such frightful ferocity as he manifested in his attacks. It was as much the latter as the former which contributed to the undoing of our enemies, who, accustomed though they were to the ferocity of terrible creatures, seemed awed by the sight of this strange beast from another world battling at the side of his equally strange master. Yet they were no cowards, and only by teamwork did Nobs and I overcome them at last. We would rush for a man simultaneously, and as Nobs leaped for him upon one side, I would strike at his head with the stone hatchet from the other. As the last man went down, I heard the running of many feet approaching us from the direction of the plaza. To be captured now would mean death, yet I could not attempt to leave the village without first ascertaining the whereabouts of Ajor and releasing her if she were held a captive. That I could escape the village I was not at all sure, but of one thing I was positive, that it would do neither Ajor nor myself any service to remain where I was and be captured. So with Nobs, bloody but happy, following at heel, I turned down the first alley and slunk away in the direction of the northern end of the village. Friendless and alone, hunted through the dark labyrinths of this savage community, I seldom have felt more helpless than at that moment. Yet far transcending any fear which I may have felt for my own safety was my concern for that of Ajor. What fate had befallen her? Where was she, and in whose power? That I should live to learn the answers to these queries I doubted, but that I should face death gladly in the attempt, of that I was certain. And why? With all my concern for the welfare of my friends who had accompanied me to Caprona, and of my best friend of all, Bowen J. Tyler, Jr., I never yet had experienced the almost paralyzing fear for the safety of any other creature which now threw me alternately into a fever of despair and into a cold sweat of apprehension as my mind dwelt upon the fate on one bit of half savage femininity of whose very existence even I had not dreamed a few short weeks before. What was this hold she had upon me? Was I bewitched that my mind refused to function sanely, and that judgment and reason were dethroned by some mad sentiment which I steadfastly refused to believe was love? I had never been in love. I was not in love now. The very thought was preposterous. How could I, Thomas Billings, the right-hand man of the late Bowen J. Tyler, Sr., one of America's foremost captains of industry and the greatest man in California, be in love with the word stuck in my throat. Yet by my own American standards, Ajor could be nothing else. At home, for all her beauty, for all her delicately tinted skin, little Ajor, by her apparel, by the habits and customs and manners of her people, by her life, would have been classed a squaw. Tom Billings in love with a squaw! I shuddered at the thought. And then there came to my mind, in a sudden, brilliant flash upon the screen of recollection, the picture of Ajor as I had last seen her, and I lived again the delicious moment in which we had clung to one another, lips smothering lips, as I left her to go to the council hall of Altan. and I could have kicked myself for the snob and the cad that my thoughts had proven me who had always prided myself that I was neither the one nor the other. These things ran through my mind as Nobs and I made our way through the dark village, the voices and footsteps of those who sought us still in our ears. These and many other things, nor could I escape the incontrovertible fact that the little figure round which my recollections and my hopes entwined themselves was that of Ajor, beloved barbarian. My reveries were broken in upon by a hoarse whisper from the black interior of a hut past which we were making our way. My name was called in a low voice, and a man stepped out beside me as I halted with raised knife. It was Chal az. "Quick!" he warned. "In here! It is my hut, and they will not search it." I hesitated, recalled his attitude of a few minutes before, and as though he had read my thoughts, he said quickly, "I could not speak to you in the plaza without danger of arousing suspicions which would prevent me aiding you later, for word had gone out that Altan had turned against you and would destroy you. This was after Du-seen the Galu arrived." I followed him into the hut, and with Nobs at our heels, we passed through several chambers into a remote and windowless apartment where a small lamp sputtered in its unequal battle with the inky darkness. A hole in the roof permitted the smoke from burning oil egress, yet the atmosphere was far from lucid. Here Chal az motioned me to a seat upon a furry hide spread upon the earthen floor. "I am your friend," he said. "You saved my life, and I am no ingrate, as is the Batu Altan. I will serve you, and there are others here who will serve you against Altan and this renegade Galu, Du-seen." "But where is Ajor?" I asked, for I cared little for my own safety while she was in danger. "Ajor is safe too," he answered. "We learned the designs of Altan and Du-seen. The latter, learning that Ajor was here, demanded her, and Altan promised that he should have her; but when the warriors went to get her, To-mar went with them. Ajor tried to defend herself. She killed one of the warriors, and then To-mar picked her up in his arms when the others had taken her weapons from her. He told the others to look after the wounded man, who was really already dead, and to seize you upon your return, and that he, To-mar, would bear Ajor to Altan. But instead of bearing her to Altan, he took her to his own hut, where she now is with So-al, To-mar's she. It all happened very quickly. To-mar and I were in the council hut when Du-seen attempted to take the dog from you. I was seeking To-mar for this work. He ran out immediately and accompanied the warriors to your hut, while I remained to watch what went on within the council hut and to aid you if you needed aid. What has happened since, you know." I thanked him for his loyalty and then asked him to take me to Ajor, but he said that it could not be done, as the village streets were filled with searchers. In fact, we could hear them passing to and fro among the huts, making inquiries, and at last Chal az thought it best to go to the doorway of his dwelling, which consisted of many huts joined together, lest they enter and search. Chal az was absent for a long time, several hours which seemed an eternity to me. All sounds of pursuit had long since ceased, and I was becoming uneasy because of his protracted absence when I heard him returning through the other apartments of his dwelling. He was perturbed when he entered that in which I awaited him, and I saw a worried expression upon his face. "What is wrong?" I asked. "Have they found Ajor?" "No," he replied, "but Ajor has gone. She learned that you had escaped them and was told that you had left the village, believing that she had escaped too. So-al could not detain her. She made her way out over the top of the palisade, armed with only her knife." "Then I must go," I said, rising. Nobs rose and shook himself. He had been dead asleep when I spoke. "Yes," agreed Chal az, "you must go at once. It is almost dawn. Du-seen leaves at daylight to search for her." He leaned close to my ear and whispered, "There are many to follow and help you. Altan has agreed to aid Du-seen against the Galus of Jor; but there are many of us who have combined to rise against Altan and prevent this ruthless desecration of the laws and customs of the Kro-lu and of Caspak. We will rise as Luata has ordained that we shall rise, and only thus. No Batu may win to the estate of a Galu by treachery and force of arms while Chal az lives, and may wield a heavy blow and a sharp spear with true Krolus at his back." "I hope that I may live to aid you," I replied. "If I had my weapons and my ammunition, I could do much. Do you know where they are?" "No," he said. "They have disappeared." And then, "Wait! You cannot go forth half armed, and garbed as you are. You are going into the Galu country, and you must go as a Galu. Come." And without waiting for a reply, he led me into another apartment, or to be more explicit, another of the several huts which formed his cellular dwelling. Here was a pile of skins, weapons and ornaments. "Remove your strange apparel," said Chal az, "and I will fit you out as a true Galu. I have slain several of them in the raids of my early days as a Kro-lu, and here are their trappings." I saw the wisdom of his suggestion, and as my clothes were by now so ragged as to but half conceal my nakedness, I had no regrets in laying them aside. Stripped to the skin, I donned the red deerskin tunic, the leopard tail, the golden fillet, armlets and leg ornaments of a Galu, with the belt, scabbard and knife, the shield, spear, bow and arrow, and the long rope, which I learned now for the first time is the distinctive weapon of the Galu warrior. It is a rawhide rope, not dissimilar to those of the western plains and cow camps of my youth. The honda is a golden oval and accurate weight for the throwing of the noose. This heavy honda, Chal az explained, is used as a weapon, being thrown with great force and accuracy at an enemy and then coiled in for another cast. In hunting and in battle they use both the noose and the honda. If several warriors surround a single foeman or quarry, they rope it with the noose from several sides; but a single warrior against a lone antagonist will attempt to brain his foe with the metal oval. I could not have been more pleased with any weapon, short of a rifle, which he could have found for me, since I have been adept with the rope from early childhood. But I must confess that I was less favorably inclined toward my apparel. In so far as the sensation was concerned, I might as well have been entirely naked, so short and light was the tunic. When I asked Chal az for the Caspakian name for rope, he told me ga, and for the first time I understood the derivation of the word Galu, which means rope man. Entirely outfitted, I would not have known myself, so strange was my garb and my armament. Upon my back were slung my bow, arrows, shield and short spear. From the center of my girdle depended my knife. At my right hip was my stone hatchet, and at my left hung the coils of my long rope. By reaching my right hand over my left shoulder, I could seize the spear or arrows. My left hand could find my bow over my right shoulder, while a veritable contortionist act was necessary to place my shield in front of me and upon my left arm. The shield, long and oval, is utilized more as a back armor than as a defense against frontal attack, for the close-set armlets of gold upon the left forearm are principally depended upon to ward off knife, spear, hatchet or arrow from in front. But against the greater carnivora and the attacks of several human antagonists, the shield is utilized to its best advantage and carried by loops upon the left arm. Fully equipped except for a blanket, I followed Chal az from his domicile into the dark and deserted alleys of Kro-lu. Silently we crept along, Nobs silent at heel, toward the nearest portion of the palisade. Here Chal az bade me farewell, telling me that he hoped to see me soon among the Galus, as he felt that the call soon would come to him. I thanked him for his loyal assistance and promised that whether I reached the Galu country or not, I should always stand ready to repay his kindness to me, and that he could count on me in the revolution against Altan. End of chapter 6. Seven of the People That Time Forgot. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Ralph Snelson. The People That Time Forgot. by Edgar Rice Burroughs. Chapter 7. To run up the inclined surface of the palisade and drop to the ground outside was the work of but a moment, or would have been but for Nobs. I had to put my rope about him after we reached the top, lift him over the sharpened stakes, and lower him upon the outside. To find Ajor in the unknown country to the north seemed rather hopeless, yet I could do no less than try, praying in the meanwhile that she would come through unscathed and in safety to her father. As Nobs and I swung along in the growing light of the coming day, I was impressed by the lessening numbers of savage beasts the farther north I traveled. With the decrease among the carnivora, the herbivora increased in quantity, though anywhere in Caspak they are sufficiently plentiful to furnish ample food for the meat eaters of each locality. The wild cattle, antelope, deer, and horses I passed showed changes in evolution from their cousins farther south. The kine were smaller and less shaggy, the horses larger. North of the Kolu village I saw a small band of the latter, about the size of those of our old western plains, such as the Indians bred in former days, and to a lesser extent even now. They were fat and sleek, and I looked upon them with covetous eyes and with thoughts that any old cowpuncher may well imagine I might entertain after having hoofed it for weeks. But they were wary, scarce permitting me to approach within bow and arrow range, much less within roping distance. Yet I still had hopes which I never discarded. Twice before noon we were stalked and charged by man-eaters, but even though I was without firearms, I still had ample protection in Nobs, who evidently had learned something of Caspakian hunt rules under the tutelage of Du seen or some other Galu, and of course a great deal more by experience. He always was on the alert for dangerous foes, invariably warning me by low growls of the approach of a large carnivorous animal long before I could either see or hear it. And then when the thing appeared, he would run snapping at its heels, drawing the charge away from me until I found safety in some tree. Yet never did the wily Nobs take an unnecessary chance of a mauling. He would dart in and away so quickly that not even the lightning-like movements of the great cats could reach him. I have seen him tantalize them thus until they fairly screamed in rage. The greatest inconvenience the hunters caused me was the delay, for they have a nasty habit of keeping one treed for an hour or more if balked in their designs. But at last we came in sight of a line of cliffs running east and west across our path as far as the eye could see in either direction, and I knew that we reached the natural boundary which marks the line between the Kro-Lu and Galu countries. The southern face of these cliffs loomed high and forbidding, rising to an altitude of some 200 feet, sheer and precipitous, without a break that the eye could perceive. How I was to find a crossing I could not guess. Whether to search to the east toward the still loftier barrier cliffs fronting upon the ocean, or westward in the direction of the inland sea, was a question which baffled me. Were there many passes or only one? I had no way of knowing. I could but trust to chance. It never occurred to me that Nobs had made the crossing at least once, possibly a greater number of times, and that he might lead me to the pass, and so it was with no idea of assistance that I appealed to him as a man alone with a dumb brute so often does. "Nobs," I said, "how the devil are we going to cross those cliffs?" I do not say that he understood me, even though I realize that an Airedale is a mighty intelligent dog; but I do swear that he seemed to understand me, for he wheeled about, barking joyously and trotting off toward the west, and when I didn't follow him, he ran back to me, barking furiously, and at last taking hold of the calf of my leg in an effort to pull me along in the direction he wished me to go. Now, as my legs were naked and Nob's jaws are much more powerful than he realizes, I gave in and followed him, for I knew that I might as well go west as east, as far as any knowledge I had of the correct direction went. We followed the base of the cliffs for a considerable distance. The ground was rolling and tree-dotted and covered with grazing animals, alone, in pairs, and in herds, a motley aggregation of the modern and extinct herbivore of the world. A huge woolly mastodon stood swaying to and fro in the shade of a giant fern, a mighty bull with enormous upcurving tusks. Near him grazed an aurochs bull with a cow and a calf; close beside, a lone rhinoceros asleep in a dust hole. Deer, antelope, bison, horses, sheep and goats were all in sight at the same time, and at a little distance a great megatherium reared up on its huge tail and massive hind feet to tear the leaves from a tall tree. The forgotten past rubbed flanks with the present, while Tom Billings, modern of the moderns, passed in the garb of pre-glacial man, and before him trotted a creature of a breed scarce 60 years old. Nobs was a parvenu, but it failed to worry him. As we neared the inland sea, we saw more flying reptiles and several great amphibians, but none of them attacked us. As we were topping a rise in the middle of the afternoon, I saw something that brought me to a sudden stop. Calling Nobs in a whisper, I cautioned him to silence, and kept him at heel while I threw myself flat and watched from behind a sheltering shrub a body of warriors approaching the cliff from the south. I could see that they were Galus, and I guessed that Du seen led them. They had taken a shorter route to the pass and so had overhauled me. I could see them plainly, for they were no great distance away, and saw with relief that Ajor was not with them. The cliffs before them were broken and ragged, those coming from the east overlapping the cliffs from the west. Into the defile formed by this overlapping the party filed. I could see them climbing upward for a few minutes, and then they disappeared from view. When the last of them had passed from sight, I rose and bent my steps in the direction of the pass, the same pass toward which Nobs had evidently been leading me. I went warily as I approached it, for fear the party might have halted to rest. If they hadn't halted, I had no fear of being discovered, for I had seen that the Galus marched without point, flankers or rear guard. And when I reached the pass and saw a narrow one-man trail leading upward at a stiff angle, I wished that I were chief of the Galus for a few weeks. A dozen men could hold off forever in that narrow pass all the hordes which might be brought up from the south, yet there it lay entirely unguarded. The Galus might be a great people in Caspak, but they were pitifully inefficient in even the simpler forms of military tactics. I was surprised that even a man in the Stone Age should be so lacking in military perspicacity. Du seen dropped far below par in my estimation as I saw the slovenly formation of his troop as it passed through an enemy country and entered the domain of the chief against whom he had risen in revolt. But Du seen must have known Jor the chief and known that Jor would not be waiting for him at the pass. Nevertheless, he took unwarranted chances. With one squad of a home guard company I could have conquered Caspak. Nobs and I followed to the summit of the pass, and there we saw the party defiling into the Galu country, the level of which was not, on an average, over 50 feet below the summit of the cliffs and about 150 feet above the adjacent Kolu domain. Immediately the landscape changed. The trees, the flowers and the shrubs were of a hardier type, and I realized that at night the Galu blanket might be almost a necessity. Acacia and eucalyptus predominated among the trees, yet there were ash and oak and even pine and fir and hemlock. The tree life was riotous. The forests were dense and peopled by enormous trees. From the summit of the cliff I could see forests rising hundreds of feet above the level upon which I stood, and even at the distance they were from me I realized that the boles were of gigantic size. At last I had come to the Galu country. Though not conceived in Caspak, I indeed come up Korsvajo. From the beginning I had come up through the hideous horrors of the lower Caspakian spheres of evolution, and I could not but feel something of the elation and pride which had filled Tomar and So-al when they realized that the call had come to them and they were about to rise from the estate of Band lus to that of Kro-lus. I was glad that I was not Batu. But where was Ajor? Though my eyes searched the wide landscape before me, I saw nothing other than the warriors of Du seen and the beasts of the fields and the forests. Surrounded by forests, I could see wide plains dotting the country as far as the eye could reach, but nowhere was a sign of a small Galu she, the beloved she whom I would have given my right hand to see. Nobs and I were hungry. We had not eaten since the preceding night. and below us was game deer, sheep, anything that a hungry hunter might crave. So down the steep trail we made our way, and then upon my belly, with Nobs crouching low behind me, I crawled toward a small herd of red deer feeding at the edge of a plain, close beside a forest. There was ample cover, what with solitary trees and dotting bushes, so that I found no difficulty in stalking upwind to within 50 feet of my quarry, a large, sleek doe unaccompanied by a fawn. Greatly then did I regret my rifle. Never in my life had I shot an arrow, but I knew how it was done, and fitting the shaft to my string, I aimed carefully and let drive. At the same instant I called to Nobs and leaped to my feet. The arrow caught the doe full in the side, and in the same moment Nobs was after her. She turned to flee with the two of us pursuing her, Nobs with his great fangs bared, and I with my short spear poised for a cast. The balance of the herd sprang quickly away, but the hurt doe lagged, and in a moment Nobs was beside her and had leaped at her throat. He had her down when I came up, and I finished her with my spear. It didn't take me long to have a fire going and a steak broiling, and while I was preparing for my own feast, Nobs was filling himself with raw venison. Never have I enjoyed a meal so heartily. For 2 days I searched fruitlessly back and forth from the inland sea almost to the barrier cliffs for some trace of Ajor, and always I trended northward; but I saw no sign of any human being, not even the band of Galu warriors under Du seen. And then I commenced to have misgivings. Had Chal az spoken the truth to me when he said that Ajor had quit the village of the Kro lu? Might he not have been acting upon the orders of Altan, in whose savage bosom might have lurked some small spark of shame that he had attempted to do to death one who had befriended a Kro lu warrior, a guest who had brought no harm upon the Kro lu race, and thus have sent me out upon a fruitless mission in the hope that the wild beast would do what Altan hesitated to do? I did not know, but the more I thought upon it, the more convinced I became that Ajor had not quitted the Kro lu village. But if not, what had brought Du seen forth without her? There was a puzzler, and once again I was all at sea. On the second day of my experience of the Galu country, I came upon a bunch of as magnificent horses as it has ever been my lot to see. They were dark bays with blazed faces and perfect surcingles of white about their barrels. Their forelegs were white to the knees. In height they stood almost 16 hands, the mares being a trifle smaller than the stallions, of which there were 3 or 4 in this band of 100, which comprised many colts and half-grown horses. Their markings were almost identical, indicating a purity of strain that might have persisted since long ages ago. If I had coveted one of the little ponies of the Kro lu country, imagine my state of mind when I came upon these magnificent creatures. No sooner had I espied them than I determined to possess one of them, nor did it take me long to select a beautiful young stallion, a 4-year-old I guessed him. The horses were grazing close to the edge of the forest in which Nobs and I were concealed, while the ground between us and them was dotted with clumps of flowering brush which offered perfect concealment. The stallion of my choice grazed with a filly and 2 yearlings a little apart from the balance of the herd and nearest to the forest and to me. At my whispered "Charge!" Nobs flattened himself to the ground, and I knew that he would not again move until I called him, unless danger threatened me from the rear. Carefully I crept forward toward my unsuspecting quarry, coming undetected to the concealment of a bush not more than 20 feet from him. Here I quietly arranged my noose, spreading it flat and open upon the ground. To step to one side of the bush and throw directly from the ground, which is the style I am best in, would take but an instant, and in that instant the stallion would doubtless be under way at top speed in the opposite direction. Then he would have to wheel about when I surprised him, and in doing so he would most certainly rise slightly upon his hind feet and throw up his head, presenting a perfect target for my noose as he pivoted. Yes, I had it beautifully worked out, and I waited until he should turn in my direction. At last it became evident that he was doing so, when apparently without cause the filly raised her head, neighed, and started off at a trot in the opposite direction, immediately followed of course by the colts and my stallion. It looked for a moment as though my last hope was blasted, but presently their fright, if fright it was, passed, and they resumed grazing again 100 yards farther on. This time there was no bush within 50 feet of them, and I was at a loss as to how to get within safe roping distance. Anywhere under 40 feet I am an excellent roper; at 50 feet I am fair, but over that I knew it would be a matter of luck if I succeeded in getting my noose about that beautiful arched neck. As I stood debating the question in my mind, I was almost upon the point of making the attempt at the long throw. I had plenty of rope, this Galu weapon being fully 60 feet long. How I wished for the collies from the ranch! At a word they would have circled this little bunch and driven it straight down to me. And then it flashed into my mind that Nobs had run with those collies all one summer, that he had gone down to the pasture with them after the cows every evening, and done his part in driving them back to the milking barn, and had done it intelligently. But Nobs had never done the thing alone, and it had been a year since he had done it at all. However, the chances were more in favor of my foozling the long throw than that Nobs would fall down in his part if I gave him the chance. Having come to a decision, I had to creep back to Nobs and get him, and then with him at my heels return to a large bush near the four horses. Here we could see directly through the bush, and pointing the animals out to Nobs, I whispered, "Fetch 'em, boy." In an instant he was gone, circling wide toward the rear of the quarry. They caught sight of him almost immediately and broke into a trot away from him, but when they saw that he was apparently giving them a wide berth, they stopped again, though they stood watching him with high-held heads and quivering nostrils. It was a beautiful sight, and then Nobs turned in behind them and trotted slowly back toward me. He did not bark nor come rushing down upon them, and when he had come closer to them, he proceeded at a walk. The splendid creatures seemed more curious than fearful, making no effort to escape until Nobs was quite close to them. Then they trotted slowly away, but at right angles. And now the fun and trouble commenced. Nobs, of course, attempted to turn them, and he seemed to have selected the stallion to work upon, for he paid no attention to the others, having intelligence enough to know that a lone dog could run his legs off before he could round up four horses that didn't wish to be rounded up. The stallion, however, had notions of his own about being headed, and the result was as pretty a race as one could care to see. Gad, how that horse could run! He seemed to flatten out and shoot through the air with the very minimum of exertion, and at his forefoot ran Nobs, doing his best to turn him. He was barking now, and twice he leaped high against the stallion's flank, but this cost too much effort and always lost him ground, as each time he was hurled heels over head by the impact. Yet before they disappeared over a rise in the ground, I was sure that Nobs' persistence was bearing fruit. It seemed to me that the horse was giving way a trifle to the right. Nobs was between him and the main herd, to which the yearling and filly had already fled. As I stood waiting for Nobs' return, I could not but speculate upon my chances should I be attacked by some formidable beast. I was some distance from the forest, and armed with weapons in the use of which I was quite untrained, though I had practiced some with the spear since leaving the Kolu country. I must admit that my thoughts were not pleasant ones, verging almost upon cowardice, until I chanced to think of little Ajor alone in this same land and armed only with a knife. I was immediately filled with shame. But in thinking the matter over since, I have come to the conclusion that my state of mind was influenced largely by my approximate nakedness. If you have never wandered about in broad daylight garbed in a bit of red deerskin in inadequate length, you can have no conception of the sensation of futility that overwhelms one. Clothes, to a man accustomed to wearing clothes, impart a certain self-confidence. Lack of them induces panic. But no beast attacked me, though I saw several menacing forms passing through the dark aisles of the forest. At last I commenced to worry over Nobs' protracted absence and to fear that something had befallen him. I was coiling my rope to start out in search of him when I saw the stallion leap into view at almost the same spot behind which he had disappeared, and at his heels ran Nobs. Neither was running so fast or furiously as when last I had seen them. The horse, as he approached me, I could see was laboring hard, yet he kept gamely to his task, and Nobs too. The splendid fellow was driving the quarry straight toward me. I crouched behind my bush and laid my noose in readiness to throw. As the two approached my hiding place, Nobs reduced his speed, and the stallion, evidently only too glad of the respite, dropped into a trot. It was at this gait that he passed me. My rope hand flew forward, the honda well down held the noose open, and the beautiful bay fairly ran his head into it. Instantly he wheeled to dash off at right angles. I braced myself with the rope around my hip and brought him to a sudden stand. Rearing and struggling, he fought for his liberty, while Nobs, panting and with lolling tongue, came and threw himself down near me. He seemed to know that his work was done and that he had earned his rest. The stallion was pretty well spent, and after a few minutes of struggling, he stood with feet far spread, nostrils dilated and eyes wide, watching me as I edged toward him, taking in the slack of the rope as I advanced. A dozen times he reared and tried to break away, but always I spoke soothingly to him, and after an hour of effort I succeeded in reaching his head and stroking his muzzle. Then I gathered a handful of grass and offered it to him, and always I talked to him in a quiet and reassuring voice. I had expected a battle royal, but on the contrary I found his taming a matter of comparative ease. Though wild, he was gentle to a degree, and of such remarkable intelligence that he soon discovered that I had no intention of harming him. After that, all was easy. Before that day was done, I had taught him to lead and to stand while I stroked his head and flanks, and to eat from my hand, and had the satisfaction of seeing the light of fear die in his large, intelligent eyes. The following day I fashioned a hackamore from a piece which I cut from the end of my long Galu rope, and then I mounted him fully prepared for a struggle of titanic proportions in which I was none too sure that he would not come off victor. But he never made the slightest effort to unseat me, and from then on his education was rapid. No horse ever learned more quickly the meaning of the rein and the pressure of the knees. I think he soon learned to love me, and I know that I loved him, while he and Nobs were the best of pals. I called him Ace. I had a friend who was once in the French Flying Corps, and when Ace let himself out, he certainly flew. I cannot explain to you, nor can you understand unless you too are a horseman, the exhilarating feeling of well-being which pervaded me from the moment that I commenced riding Ace. I was a new man, imbued with a sense of superiority that led me to feel that I could go forth and conquer all Caspak single-handed. Now, when I needed meat, I ran it down on Ace and roped it, and when some great beast with which we could not cope threatened us, we galloped away to safety. But for the most part the creatures we met looked upon us in terror, for Ace and I in combination presented a new and unusual beast beyond their experience and ken. For 5 days I rode back and forth across the southern end of the Galu country without seeing a human being, yet all the time I was working slowly toward the north, for I had determined to comb the territory thoroughly in search of Ajor. But on the 5th day, as I emerged from a forest, I saw some distance ahead of me a single small figure pursued by many others. Instantly I recognized the quarry as Ajor. The entire party was fully a mile away from me, and they were crossing my path at right angles, Ajor a few hundred yards in advance of those who followed her. One of her pursuers was far in advance of the others and was gaining upon her rapidly. With a word and a pressure of the knees, I sent Ace leaping out into the open, and with Nobs running close alongside, we raced toward her. At first none of them saw us, but as we neared Ajor, the pack behind the foremost pursuer discovered us and set up such a howl as I never before have heard. They were all Galus, and I soon recognized the foremost as Du-seen. He was almost upon Ajor now, and with a sense of terror such as I had never before experienced, I saw that he ran with his knife in his hand, and that his intention was to slay rather than capture. I could not understand it, but I could only urge Ace to greater speed, and most nobly did the wondrous creature respond to my demands. If ever a four-footed creature approximated flying, it was Ace that day. Du Seen, intent upon his brutal design, had as yet not noticed us. He was within a pace of Ajor when Ace and I dashed between them, and I, leaning down to the left, swept my little barbarian into the hollow of an arm and up on the withers of my glorious Ace. We had snatched her from the very clutches of Du Seen, who halted, mystified and raging. Ajor too was mystified, as we had come up from diagonally behind her, so that she had no idea that we were near until she was swung to Ace's back. The little savage turned with drawn knife to stab me, thinking that I was some new enemy, when her eyes found my face and she recognized me. With a little sob she threw her arms about my neck, gasping, "My Tom! My Tom!" And then Ace sank suddenly into thick mud to his belly, and Ajor and I were thrown far over his head. He had run into one of those numerous springs which cover Caspak. Sometimes they are little lakes, again but tiny pools, and often more quagmires of mud, as was this one, overgrown with lush grasses, which effectually hid its treacherous identity. It is a wonder that Ace did not break a leg, so fast he was going when he fell; but he didn't, though with 4 good legs he was unable to wallow from the mire. Ajor and I had sprawled face down in the covering grasses, and so had not sunk deeply. But when we tried to rise, we found that there was not footing, and presently we saw that Du Seen and his followers were coming down upon us. There was no escape. It was evident that we were doomed. "Slay me," begged Ajor. "Let me die at thy loved hands, rather than beneath the knife of this hateful thing, for he will kill me. He has sworn to kill me. Last night he captured me, and when later he would have his way with me, I struck him with my fists, and with my knife I stabbed him, and then I escaped, leaving him raging in pain and thwarted desire. Today they searched for me and found me, and as I fled, Du Seen ran after me, crying that he would slay me. Kill me, my Tom, and then fall upon thine own spear, for they will kill you horribly if they take you alive." I couldn't kill her, not at least until the last moment, and I told her so, and that I loved her, and that until death came, I would live and fight for her. Nobs had followed us into the bog and had done fairly well at first, but when he neared us, he too sank to his belly and could only flounder about. We were in this predicament when Du Seen and his followers approached the edge of the horrible swamp. I saw that Altan was with him, and many other Kro lu warriors. The alliance against Jor the chief had therefore been consummated, and this horde was already marching upon the Galu city. I sighed as I thought how close I had been to saving not only Ajor, but her father and his people from defeat and death. Beyond the swamp was a dense wood. Could we have reached this, we would have been safe, but it might as well have been 100 miles away as 100 yards across that hidden lake of sticky mud. Upon the edge of the swamp Du Seen and his horde halted to revile us. They could not reach us with their hands, but at a command from Du Seen they fitted arrows to their bows, and I saw that the end had come. Ajor huddled close to me, and I took her in my arms. "I love you, Tom," she said. "Only you." Tears came to my eyes then, not tears of self-pity for my predicament, but tears from a heart filled with a great love, a heart that sees the sun of its life and its love setting even as it rises. The renegade Galus and their Kro lu allies stood waiting for the word from Du Seen that would launch that barbed avalanche of death upon us, when there broke from the wood beyond the swamp the sweetest music that ever fell upon the ears of man, the sharp staccato of at least 20 rifles fired rapidly at will. Down went the Galu and Kro lu warriors like tenpins before that deadly fusillade. What could it mean? To me it meant but one thing, and that was that Hollis and Short and the others had scaled the cliffs and made their way north to the Galu country upon the opposite side of the island in time to save Ajor and me from almost certain death. I didn't have to have an introduction to them to know that the men who held those rifles were the men of my own party, and when a few minutes later they came forth from their concealment, my eyes verified my hopes. There they were, every man jack of them, and with them were 1,000 straight, sleek warriors of the Galu race, and ahead of the others came two men in the garb of Galus. Each was tall and straight and wonderfully muscled, yet they differed, as Ace might differ from a perfect specimen of another species. As they approached the mire, Ajor held forth her arms and cried, "Jor, my chief, my father!" And the elder of the two rushed in knee deep to rescue her, and then the other came close and looked into my face, and his eyes went wide, and mine too, and I cried, "Bowen! For heaven's sake, Bowen Tyler!" It was he! My search was ended. Around me were all my company and the man we had searched a new world to find. They cut saplings from the forest and laid a road into the swamp before they could get us all out, and then we marched back to the city of Jor, the Galu chief, and there was great rejoicing when Ajor came home again, mounted upon the glossy back of the stallion Ace. Tyler and Hollis and Short and all the rest of us Americans nearly worked our jaws loose on the march back to the village, and for days afterward we kept it up. They told me how they had crossed the barrier cliffs in 5 days, working 24 hours a day in 3 8-hour shifts, with 2 reliefs to each shift alternating half-hourly. 2 men with electric drills driven from the dynamos aboard the Toreador drilled 2 holes 4 feet apart in the face of the cliff and in the same horizontal planes. The holes slanted slightly downward. Into these holes the iron rods brought as a part of our equipment, and for just this purpose, were inserted, extending about a foot beyond the face of the rock. Across these 2 rods a plank was laid, and then the next shift, mounting to the new level, bored 2 more holes 5 feet above the new platform, and so on. During the nights the searchlights from the Toreador were kept playing upon the cliff at the point where the drills were working, and at the rate of 10 feet an hour the summit was reached upon the 5th day. Ropes were lowered, blocks lashed to trees at the top, and crude elevators rigged, so that by the night of the 5th day the entire party, with the exception of the few men needed to man the Toreador, were within Caspak with an abundance of arms, ammunition, and equipment. From then on they fought their way north in search of me, after a vain and perilous effort to enter the hideous reptile-infested country to the south. Owing to the number of guns among them, they had not lost a man, but their path was strewn with the dead creatures they had been forced to slay to win their way to the north end of the island, where they had found Bowen and his bride among the Galus of Jor. The reunion between Bowen and Nobs was marked by a frantic display upon Nobs' part, which almost stripped Bowen of the scanty attire that the Galu custom had vouchsafed him. When we arrived at the Galu city, Lys La Rue was waiting to welcome us. She was Mrs. Tyler now, as the master of the Toreador had married them the very day that the search party had found them, though neither Lys nor Bowen would admit that any civil or religious ceremony could have rendered more sacred the bonds with which God had united them. Neither Bowen nor the party from the Toreador had seen any sign of Bradley and his party. They had been so long lost now that any hopes for them must be definitely abandoned. The Galus had heard rumors of them, as had the western Kro-Lu and Band-lu, but none had seen aught of them since they had left Fort Dinosaur months since. We rested in Jor's village for a fortnight while we prepared for the southward journey to the point where the Toreador was to lie offshore in wait for us. During these 2 weeks Chal-az came up from the Kro-Lu country, now a full-fledged Galu. He told us that the remnants of Altan's party had been slain when they attempted to re-enter Kro-Lu. Chal-az had been made chief, and when he rose, had left the tribe under a new leader whom all respected. Nobs stuck close to Bowen, but Ace and Ajor and I went out upon many long rides through the beautiful North Galu country. Chal-az had brought my arms and ammunition up from Kro-Lu with him, but my clothes were gone. Nor did I miss them once I became accustomed to the free attire of the Galu. At last came the time for our departure. Upon the following morning we were to set out toward the south and the Toreador and dear old California. I had asked Ajor to go with us, but Jor, her father, had refused to listen to the suggestion. No pleas could swerve him from his decision. Ajor the Cosatolo, from whom might spring a new and greater Caspakian race, could not be spared. I might have any other she among the Galus, but Ajor, no. The poor child was heartbroken, and as for me, I was slowly realizing the hold that Ajor had upon my heart, and wondered how I should get along without her. As I held her in my arms that last night, I tried to imagine what life would be like without her, for at last there had come to me the realization that I loved her, loved my little barbarian, and as I finally tore myself away and went to my own hut to snatch a few hours' sleep before we set off upon our long journey on the morrow, I consoled myself with the thought that time would heal the wound, and that back in my native land I should find a mate who would be all and more to me than little Ajor could ever be, a woman of my own race and my own culture. Morning came more quickly than I could have wished. I rose and breakfasted, but saw nothing of Ajor. It was best, I thought, that I go thus without the harrowing pangs of a last farewell. The party formed for the march, an escort of Galu warriors ready to accompany us. I could not even bear to go to Ace's corral and bid him farewell. The night before I had given him to Ajor, and now in my mind the two seemed inseparable. And so we marched away, down the street flanked with its stone houses, and out through the wide gateway in the stone wall which surrounds the city, and on across the clearing toward the forest through which we must pass to reach the northern boundary of Galu, beyond which we would turn south. At the edge of the forest I cast a backward glance at the city which held my heart, and beside the massive gateway I saw that which brought me to a sudden halt. It was a little figure leaning against one of the great upright posts upon which the gates swing, a crumpled little figure, and even at this distance I could see its shoulders heave to the sobs that racked it. It was the last straw. Bowen was near me. "Good bye, old man," I said. "I'm going back." He looked at me in surprise. "Good bye, old man," he said, and grasped my hand. "I thought you'd do it in the end." And then I went back and took Ajor in my arms and kissed the tears from her eyes and a smile to her lips, while together we watched the last of the Americans disappear into the forest. End of chapter 7. End of The People That Time Forgot.